Hey guys, thanks for being here. My name is Lee Bratch. I'm the president of Texas Blockchain Council. I have the honor and privilege of being here with Anthony Pompliano, no stranger to those of us in the Bitcoin and blockchain space. Anthony, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here. The energy is great. Lots of people who are still excited about all of this, so it's great to see.
Yeah. Well, you've been on the news quite a bit lately. I've been seeing you on various channels. We've got a lot of work to do. And my thought is it's time to roll up our sleeves. It's time for the serious people to do professional and serious things. We have no more room to goof around. So what are your thoughts from an influencer perspective, a thought leader perspective, an investor? How do we move forward in the coming weeks from a public trust perspective?
I mean, it's there's not one single thing, right? Trust is kind of compounded over years and years and years and years. And what's a little crazy is we've been doing the right things. It's just there's been a bunch of people who've been doing stupid things as well. And so those people get kind of cleared out. Free market dynamics take over. Bad people who do bad things eventually get kind of uncovered and they get washed out. But what I do think is very interesting is the people who have been doing the right thing, they were here before. They're still here now. They'll be here in the future. And so for those people, I think one is just like, don't get discouraged that, the people who are doing dumb things get attention, they get capital, they get all these things. But ultimately, this is not a sprint. It is very much a marathon. And so if you look at, Bitcoin's history and kind of the broader industry, what's fascinating to me is we're only 15 years into this. Eventually, we're going to be talking about 50 years into this. And so what are the companies, who are the people who are still going to be here then? That's really, I think, where like the true signal is.
Agreed, 100%. So in your role, you get pulled into a lot of regulatory and policy conversations. That's
shocking.
What we specialize. I know. That's what we specialize in.
I don't know why they're doing that.
Well, we need it. So what is the primary thing? If you had 5 minutes with Gensler or with the chair of, Ways and Means or any of these legislators or regulators, if you have 5 minutes, what do you tell them?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a 5-minute conversation, which is part of what makes it hard, right? It's also not a 280 character like Twitter conversation either, which the nuance gets lost. But I really think that there's two core arguments or talking points that I try to hammer home. The first is this technology is as about American as it gets in terms of the ability to have free markets, the ability to really embrace capitalism, the ability to allow people to pursue the American dream. It returns a bunch of rights and kind of individual liberties back to citizens themselves. And it's done in a way where it's very hard for people to kind of corrupt it or to get too much control, too much power, too much economic might. And so I think that's the first thing. It's just like this is an American technology from an ethos standpoint. And then the second thing is it is one of the fastest growing economic sectors in the world. You can look at both the economic value that's created and captured. You can look at job creation. You can look at kind of the investment portfolios, like all these different components. And so if you want America to continue to be a leader, both from a capital market standpoint, but also an impact on the citizens, then you have to embrace this. And so if you can combine the ethos of kind of American society, democracy, and capitalism with the potential impact that it can have to the actual wallets of American citizens, hey, we got to get this right. Now, where there's a lot of debate is what is right? What are the rules? How should we enforce them? Who should be in charge? All that stuff is up for debate. But I think just getting people to understand this is important and we got to get it right, that is actually a big leap forward from where we were 2 or 3 years ago. We're getting there. Now let's get forward and let's kind of figure out what those rules should be.
Yeah, and you mentioned job creation, tax revenue. One of the things that we've been working on studying in Texas is what can we show to policymakers and say, hey, not only are we doing we're developing this level of innovation that's bringing businesses here, but let's talk about job creation locally, especially in rural areas. So we've done some studies. 2,000 direct jobs for Bitcoin mining in the state of Texas, 20,000 indirect. So 2,000 W-2, 20,000 either 1099 or indirect jobs, which is a substantial number. Bitcoin miners utilize about 1.5% of the Texas power grid. So we're talking, 1,700 megawatts of power in Texas.
Well, and when you think of that type of job creation, right, I think people say to themselves, like, okay, that's like what you're able to measure, to your point, right? It's probably even bigger than that.
Right. Secondary effects.
And I also think a lot about the compounding effect and what you're going to end up getting. And I think what Silicon Valley really benefited from was if you go back and you study the history of Silicon Valley, there was a couple of people who said, hey, we want to invest in these companies. These companies are going to go and they're going to create a bunch of economic value. Then the people who helped to build these companies, who weren't the founder, are going to say, this was fun. I want to go do it for myself. They spin out. They go start more companies. There's capital that gets recycled, and you start to compound. Now, if you fast forward from the 1950s and 60s to today, we're like, holy shit, this is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. This is amazing. Look at all the jobs that were created. Look at all the companies that were created. That's going to happen in Texas around mining and these technologies, but it's also going to happen around America. And so I think that we have to be careful that we don't just simply allow people to take a snapshot in like a static point in time and say, oh, this is as big as the industry is going to get. Because I think that it's actually, no, we're at the kind of the base of what ends up being this like exponential growth. And that's really what gets exciting, because you have to allow for time to pass. But if we get the rules right today, you lay the groundwork, and eventually that will really thrive here, both in Texas and in America.
Agreed. So I want to pivot us a little bit to something a little more controversial. We've got a lot of people on Twitter, on crypto Twitter, that they're a little dogmatic in their approach. And
understatement of the year.
Yeah. with so many people coming into the space and being exposed to the culture on Twitter, one of my concerns, and I wonder if you share this concern, is we see sort of this, and rightly so, Bitcoin is different. Mm-hmm. It is something that is apples and oranges, and, and we should kind of protect from a reputational standpoint. We shouldn't ever lump it in. And I think as far as our industry association goes, that's really mostly what we talk about. Mm-hmm. But we do it in a very hopefully tactful way. Mm-hmm. There's been some activity on Twitter that's not as tactful, and I wonder I wonder what your thoughts are. Like, to me, it's concerning, but I don't I know a lot of these people that are doing it. I know them well. They're high character people. They're high conviction people. So I very much respect them. Mm-hmm. But I do have a little bit of concern that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
My biggest thing is, like, Twitter's not real life, and you have to kind of remind people of that. Yes, it is where a conversation happens. It's not the full conversation. It's not the only conversation, but it is a conversation, an important conversation. And so there are going to be people who are great communicators. There are going to be people who are horrible communicators. There are going to be people who use legacy communication tactics, and there's going to be people who use, like, the meme lords of the world, or they're in this new digital realm, and they understand how to communicate in kind of that environment. And so I always remind myself that, like, we kind of need everybody. Like, we actually do need people who can fire up a meme and go and take on somebody who is saying stupid things that's inaccurate. We also need somebody who can put on a suit and tie and go to the White House and say, hey, this is exactly how to think about it in your terms, in your world, right, from your perspective. And so what's unique about this is there is no central planning going on. Right. So it's not like we have hey, let's have a board of directors meeting, and okay, let's tone down the memes and let's turn up the regulation talk, right? Or hey, let's do vice versa. It's every person for themselves to some degree. And so, of course, you're going to get people who do things that maybe everyone doesn't agree with it or whatever. But what I do think is very unique is that Bitcoin has zero interest and doesn't care what's going on Twitter. And so if there's one thing that I kind of like fall back on, is like the Bitcoin network is going to continue to produce blocks of transactions regardless of what the conversation on Twitter is. Now, to your point, we can be successful and shoot ourselves in the foot, or we can be successful and like make it a little bit easier for ourselves. And so what I think has really happened now is the people who have certain communication tactics, like, they're very self-aware of what they're doing, and we should actually embrace that communication, and we should use it for what it is valuable for, right? I don't think that people are going to like create memes, print them out on a piece of paper and show up to like politicians' office and like hand them to them. No, it's very much like for the digital realm. It's there to kind of combat all the FUD and all that type of stuff. At the same time, what we need is we need tons of people who say, hey, that's not my strength. I have these other strengths. Let me go and do that. And so I think about it less about like, hey, let's tone down the people on the internet or tone down the people who maybe, have kind of different tactics. And instead, let's really ratchet up all the other abilities that we have. And if you can get them onto equal footing, that's pretty much a beast, in terms of the ability for us to communicate. It's a lot of work, right? That ends up being the difficult part.
I really like the way that you articulated that, and I think that's a strategy, with several influencers here in Austin, Texas. Austin is the Bitcoin capital of the world, in my opinion, and we've got some folks here who do that really well and they do that really tactfully, and so we're really appreciative of that and love what Austin is becoming and has become. You mentioned something I want to draw attention to: specialization. As an industry professionalizes, people do fewer things really broadly. They do them very deeply, and so kind of a honeycomb effect. You've got people that used to do 3 or 4 different things, and now they specialize in their vertical. What are some of the verticals that you think the industry does really well, and where are some of the verticals that you think we need more people that do this really well?
Yeah, I think the first thing that jumps to mind is just we're really good at building infrastructure. Obviously, I think Bitcoin as a payment network itself, like the software of Bitcoin, the design of Bitcoin, is the single greatest invention in our lifetime. There's a lot of other things that people have done that are amazing, but I think that when you really sit down and you understand just what Bitcoin has been able to accomplish, it's breathtaking. And in order for Bitcoin to have reached the amount of success that it has, you need to build all the infrastructure. You have to get the mining network out there, all that stuff. So that's great. Then if you turn and you look and you say, okay, what are the things that maybe we need to get better at? One of the biggest things is the design, the user experience, right? The interfaces of this stuff. If you go back and you look at websites from the mid 1990s, we all laugh now, and there's like nostalgia, and we're like, oh my god, like how did we use that, right? You remember the AOL like dial-up sound and the little man running across the screen and like all that stuff, and we're like, that's crazy. But now here we are, almost 30 years later, and like look at how amazing some of these websites look and things like that. I think Bitcoin and the broader industry is going through the exact same thing, right? And a very simple thing is just like, if your palms sweat and your heart beats fast when you've got to send Bitcoin to someone, we probably got to fix that, right? Because there's a lot of people who they're just not going to do it, right? And so that's a dumb one. It's a simple thing. But I think that's the type of stuff that as more and more people come in who have experience building consumer products, have experience with design, user interfaces, things like that, it'll just naturally improve. But those aren't the people who first discover some of these technologies and are like, hey, let me go do it. And so I think it's just like get more people into the industry and then let them do what they're best at. And the beauty of kind of these like open source type communities is that people show up, they work on what they're interested in. And next thing you know, we've got the best team in the world, and we didn't have to pay them. We didn't have to, go do recruiting firms. They just showed up because they were interested in the idea.
What do we have to do to get you to move to Austin?
I thought about moving to Austin. I think I've talked about this before. So when I was in New York, there was 3 places that I told my wife. I said Austin, Miami, and Puerto Rico. She immediately told me no Puerto Rico, and I was like, why? And she's like, I don't want to be on an island. I was like, okay, fine. And so we came to Austin. We went to Miami as well, and I love both places. Could see myself living in both of them. I think Miami won out mainly just because it was closer to the water. Right, like it's just weather-wise. I don't like the cold, and depending on when you come to Austin, it's usually pretty warm, but there's still a little bit of winter, and so I think that I'm probably going to stay in Miami and then just come to Austin quite a bit. I've been here, multiple times in the last 2 months, and to your point, I think there's a lot of great things that are happening here in Austin specifically, but also in the greater state of Texas. And what's fascinating to me is, if you start to kind of zoom out just from like Bitcoin and crypto industry, you have Tesla, you have a lot of these different factories, manufacturing and types of businesses that have the people who work there are also very interested in things like Bitcoin. And so you can see a world where there might be some people who on the weekends and nights are working on Bitcoin stuff and they're working at, let's say, a Tesla factory. Well, then vice versa. Maybe at some point they're like, hey, you know what? I've done this for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Now I actually want to go work on this stuff full time. And so what you're really just doing is you're attracting technical people who really like to build things, and you put them together. And even if they're not working on it full time, naturally some of that intelligence, that capital seeps into the industry, which I think is just a tailwind and makes a place like Austin really special.
So capital formation is shifting away from California. I was at a trade dinner last night with a delegation from Alberta, the wealthiest province in Canada. And they had a minister there, several delegates there. And when I was giving my remarks, I said, we feel like Alberta is the Texas of Canada. And a couple of them kind of, chuckled, but then I thought immediately, I was like, I should reverse that. I said Texas is the Alberta of the United States, and they all much more loved that, I guess.
Yes.
So what we decided is we'll trade California to Canada, and we'll take Alberta in the U.S.
That's probably a pretty good idea.
But as we see that capital flow come towards, or at least away from Silicon Valley and towards either Austin, Miami, Denver, there's companies that, and I'll even give a shout out to Trammell Venture Partners because I see one of our colleagues from there. They're here intentionally in Austin. Mm-hmm. They are a venture capital company. Mm-hmm. They're funding Bitcoin companies on Lightning, on doing a variety of different things, mm-hmm. mostly on less mining and more kind of on the layer 2 on Lightning, mm-hmm. and other things. How do we professionalize? Well, let me ask it this way. How do we attract more of that institutional capital to some non-traditional places like Austin? Austin's almost becoming traditional, but mm-hmm. it's still quasi non-traditional. Do you see a movement of institutional capital moving away from New York and Silicon Valley?
I don't think location matters anymore. I think that's probably like the biggest breakthrough is just whether an investor still lives in California, New York, or anywhere else in the world. They're not saying I only want to invest in my backyard. Like that's the real kind of 0 to 1, kind of advancement. And so what that does is you can be an entrepreneur, live anywhere in the world, build a good company, they'll find you. And I think we've seen example after example. Now, of course, there's still concentration, kind of to your point. And so what ultimately this does is it opens up the kind of aperture for investors. It also now allows for much bigger capital pools to look at your business. But it really still goes back to the same thing. If you just build a great company, people will be interested. People want to give you money, right? That's their job, is to find you and to give you the money.
I'm Lee Bratcher, the president of the Texas Blockchain Council. Thank you to everyone who came out to this year's summit, helping us make it the best one yet. Now more than ever, we need professional industry associations like the TBC to help craft effective policy instead of the CEOs of centralized exchanges roaming the halls of various state capitals or in DC. Texas is quickly becoming the center of the universe for Bitcoin, blockchain, and digital assets. If you want to be part of the future that we are crafting here in Texas, join the TBC today.